Good morning, everybody. Pastor Sal here from the Ridge, um, continuing our daily devotional on reference to our workbook, Devotional Life in the Wesleyan Tradition. Um, we are in week 5, day 2, and we're going to be talking this week about fasting, different examples of how John Wesley used fasting. So today's reading is going to be the nature of fasting. Yesterday we spoke a little bit about the importance of fasting, how important fasting can be in our devotional life, in our spiritual life, and that we need to devote sometimes time to Christ, time that we would normally be doing something else. And so we want to make sure that we um, now know the nature of fasting. So Wesley's most systematic treatment of fasting appears in the seventh discourse on the Sermon on the Mount. The sermon was included in the standard sermons, which gives heightened doctrinal significance to what he said in that message. We will use this sermon to reflect on the nature of fasting in the Wesleyan tradition. Wesley recognized that the fundamental definition for fasting in the Bible is to abstain from food. He also realized that the Bible describes practices that accompanied fasting that had no necessary connection with it. Okay, so he termed such things as in different circumstances, and sought to instruct the early Methodists in the special discipline of fasting without additional trappings. Okay, so um, again, most of the times in the Bible, it was in reference to uh, food or recognize it to abstain from food. But of course, in the Wesleyan tradition, there's many other ways. And so he termed certain things that were not necessary as in different circumstances and sought to instruct the early Methodists on special disciplines of fasting without traditional trappings. Now, Wesley was also aware that the periods of fasting varied widely in Scripture, going all the way up to 40 days and 40 nights. Okay, so, um, the 40 days and 40 nights are in the Bible several times. For example, when in the Exodus, when they are waiting for Moses to get down from the mountain, they're waiting for 40 days and 40 nights. Lots of things happen during that time. The Israelites get uneasy and they start to make false gods, and they prepare an idol. God punishes them, of course, and then leaves them in the wilderness for 40 years. Now, then you have the 40 days and 40 nights of, uh, and one of the most famous ones, of course, is Jesus, 40 days and 40 nights in the wilderness, trying to strengthen himself, trying to make sure that he um, gave himself to Christ, to God, and focus on him and during that time. And so there's many different ways that you can fast, all the way up to 40 days and 40 nights. And that's in the Bible. But again, he wanted to teach the Methodists about the normal and regular uses of the discipline, not its exceptional expressions. Okay? Uh, he believed the most common practice of fasting was for one day from morning until evening. He found support for this in the Bible and in the tradition of the early church. And so, for example, he would pick, let's say, he would pick on a Tuesday or a Wednesday, and during that day, he would, instead of fasting like several days, he would pick one day during the week, and he would fast from the morning until the evening. Um, this is something that right now, like I mentioned yesterday, those that are Muslim and or of the Islam religion, they right now are going through their what they call their period of fasting, which is Ramadan. And so for 30 days, 30 to 33 days, I believe, I can't remember off the top of my head, but it started a few days ago, and they do this for every day for 30 to 33 days or something, depending on the lunar, the calendar and so forth. So by what they go by. And so, and basically what they do is from sun up, um, which could be anywhere from like 5:30, 6 in the morning, all the way up to 7:30, 8 o'clock at night. They don't even drink water. They can't even drink water. So that's something that, but he recommended one day out of the week to do something like that, and he found some biblical backing for that, and some early traditions in the church. Now he knew that previous Christians had observed fixed fast days, usually Wednesday and Friday, and that they added other stated fast days throughout the year. As the Methodist movement grew, he likewise called for Wednesday and Friday fast days, eventually reduced to Friday only, with additional days added during the Christian and calendar year. So, again, here we see some early traditions. We see some similarities to some of our other denominational brothers and sisters, Christians, brothers and sisters. Right now in the Roman Catholic Church during Lent, they fast on Fridays. They don't eat meat on Fridays. Sometimes I remember when we used to go to church, we wouldn't eat breakfast or anything like that on Sundays. We wouldn't eat anything, or in some cases, not even drink anything until after we got out of mass or we got out of church service. Then we would go eat, or we would go, drink something or whatever. Um, Later, we would at least drink coffee, or we would have coffee, or sometimes at the church they would have little muffins, and so we would have the little tiny muffins with some coffee, maybe two or three muffins in the coffee before the service. But we wouldn't actually have a meal like a breakfast or anything until after service. And so that's something that was like in our tradition here with my family. And I know that we used to do that when I used to go to Catholic mass too, growing up. I remember we wouldn't eat anything, we wouldn't drink anything until after service. The times that we went to church. Um, so it's just different traditions, just different ways of fasting. Um, and of course, there's certain days during the calendar years that we add to that. So the weekly fast days were a reminder that abstinence is intended to be an ongoing feature of the spiritual life. Those who fasted denied themselves so they could give priority to the things of the spirit, right? So by fasting, you give up a personal time of something of yours to concentrate on God and your spiritual life. Additional fast days corresponded to special seasons, like Lent, when the emphasis was on renunciation. Finally, there were times of particular crisis or need when Wesley would call the Methodists to focus times of prayer and fasting as a means of yielding to God's will and a means of discerning God's guidance. And so for example, maybe there was a time in the church where something was going, they were going through something, uh, uh, I don't know, some kind of sickness, or something's going on with the church, or something going on with the community, and maybe they wanted to fast and pray. Prayer and fasting right now, that's something that we should be doing during this COVID time, is prayer and fasting. Just devoting ourselves to Christ and just giving everything to Him. In all these ways, Wesley was bearing witness to the comprehensive value of fasting in one's spiritual formation. So, again, fasting, all these things, all these tools are for spiritual formation, spiritual growth, to grow in your devotional life. Not a devotional time, a devotional life, which means that everything we do should be devoted to bettering and our relationship with Christ, serving His kingdom, whether we're at work, whether we're at home, whatever we do, remember, whatever you do it as if you were doing it unto the Lord. And so, and when you're at work, you do your best work. You serve your employer. You serve those that you service in your jobs or whatever. When you're at home, you be the best father, husband, brother, sister, son, daughter, uh, wife, mother, whatever, because you're doing it unto Christ, right? So anyway, that's what we need to do, is prayer and fasting. So reflecting, consider each of the seasons of the Christian year: Advent, Christmas, Epiphany, Lent, Easter, and Pentecost. Normally, we think about what each season tells us about receiving. Consider what each season asks us to give up and what role fasting might play in bearing further witness to our self-denial. So in all the calendar year, Advent, Christmas time, Epiphany time, the Lent season, the Easter season, and the Pentecost season, during all those different times of the church, um, how do you normally in each season, normally it's about receiving, but we want to make sure that we say, now how do we give up something? How do we fast during those times? How do we become a witness of our own self-denial? Okay, so think about that. Number two, what might the practice of weekly fasting do for you in the development of your spiritual life? Okay, so what can it do for you for your spiritual life? Fasting, giving up. Remember, fasting doesn't necessarily mean you're going to give up food only. It could be that you're going to give up a time that you do something that is keeping you from Christ. Or maybe it's a time that's leading you to sin. Don't go that way and go to something and do something that leads you to salvation for Christ. Fasting, giving up that time of something of the world, no matter how hard it is, and no matter what it is, and giving it to God. How is that going to improve your spiritual life? And relating, like many other Christians, Wesley understood that fasting was not meant to be an end in itself. Okay? Whatever we give up is intended to provide space in our life so that we can add something of greater value. Maybe you read a book on self-development, during that time. Not just in your spiritual life, but maybe um, how to improve your weaknesses, maybe on how not to procrastinate so much. That's big. That should be for me right there. What might fasting enable you to receive into your life at this time? Okay, so write that down in a journal. Uh, by giving up something, what's it intended to provide spaces in your life that you can add something of greater value? And how does fasting enable you to receive into your life at this time? How do you receive it in your life? All right. So that's it for today. Week 5, day 2. Tomorrow we'll get into day 3, which is types of fasting. All right. You all have a blessed day and God bless, and we'll see you tomorrow.